child who came to me, 12 years of age, with a very severe scoliosis, but he's a small child. Because he's small, we can't correct him fully, we can't fuse the entire spine. We want his growth to continue. You can see that's how he is, and that's how he is, that's his kyphosis. So we corrected him from inside the curve, we didn't correct the whole thing. And look at his sagittal balance now, it's so beautiful, and his correction was so good, he gained 5 to 6 centimeters, even just by correcting inside the curve. So scoliosis is quite important. Thank you for your attention. This, by the way, is a page from Arthved, written in 1500 BC, one of the original manuscripts. It was written in Central Asia while, we were still on our way to India, this one. And it's got a lot of medical text in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. If there are any questions, he has presented it very nicely. A lot of things we have learned. We used to prescribe arches for flat-foot patients, which he said if they are not needed at all. And when to refer patient with rickets, when to refer patient with Gino Valgum. I think these are very much highlighting things which we must follow. Any questions?
Supposing you get something like a congenital scoliosis, who's got a big curve or who's getting a lot of problems from it, then usually the earliest we operate is about 3.5 years of age to 4 years of age.
That time can anything be done from splinting or?
Usually, no.
Our physiotherapist says does some exercises, positioning or anything.
Those things really don't work, but it's mainly you're tackling respiratory distress and all those other things that come with it. These kids are pretty sick in the early days, and usually you wait 3.5, 4 years because, to tell you the truth, there are some new devices which have come in, but all those devices are fairly large, bulky, and babies being very small, it's very difficult to introduce them and keep them in. For instance, there is something called a Vector device, which you fix to 2 ribs at the top and the vertebral body at the bottom, and you expand it so that the chest expansion can happen. Now that you have to have a certain weight. Very early you can't do much. Yes, but somebody who has infantile idiopathic scoliosis, 1 year, 1.5 years, casting is something that is a very powerful tool in our hands. We cast and brace them, and in some cases the scoliosis actually resolves.
Management of leg discrepancy.
Leg
discrepancy.
Shortening of the leg.
Shortening. There are 2 ways you can do it. You can either shorten the opposite side by doing a growth arrest, or you can lengthen the shorter side. If you have up to 2 centimeters of difference, it doesn't matter, because at least 10% of us in general population will have up to 2 centimeters of discrepancy without being aware of it. But when you become more than 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters, 4 centimeters, pelvis starts tilting and you get a limb. In that case, it's your choice. Usually in India, we lengthen them because it's easier and children are quite pleased with the lengthening. Yes. You see, I'll tell you, if you had a case of... If the deformity is very small and the child is very young, you will get away just by giving vitamin D therapy to them. No, not really. I mean, it all depends on the age. Supposing there is a moderate bow leg which is visible at age 12, then you urgently need to refer, because there will be only 1.5 years of growth left, and any minimally invasive interventions that we have to do will have very little time to work. Now, supposing there is a little baby who has a very evident bow leg, we know they will remold completely. But even in those of them who have severe deformities will need to be splinted for the first 6 weeks. For splintages, you will need to unfortunately refer to an orthopedic, because you are not trained to check a splint or write a splint. So I think if you have anything more than a mild deformity, just please refer. I think that would be the
we're running
safest.
out of time.
Yeah.
Sorry to... Okay, last question.
How long we should wait to take a decision that this in a particular child, the flat foot requires correction?
Sir, basically, all flat foot corrections are done between 9 and 11 years of age, except for vertical talus, which is done at age 1. If the flat foot is rigid, you must refer straight away. If it is hypermobile, where you can restore arches, and Adams, Jack's wind-up test shows that there is an arch formation, don't worry about it. Just give them, barefoot walking, walking on tiptoes, walking in sand and grass and things like that. And at some point you can make a referral, but really till age 8, we would not be doing much.
My second question is, quite often you get children about the age of 5 to 6 years coming with leg pains. How should we approach such children? Because every time we label a growing pain, I don't know whether it's correct diagnosis or it's not.
Sir, I think you're absolutely right. Most of them are benign leg pains, but one should be cautious. If there is persistent leg pain, any weight loss, any other adverse history, then you should rule out all the other sinister problems and also look at vitamin Ds, because these days kids are really very, very deficient and they may get bone pains even from vitamin D deficiencies.
Thank you very much, sir, for a very, very lucid presentation. I have a short announcement. IAP Delhi State Branch is having its annual CME on the 2nd of December at Manik Shah Auditorium, Dholakwa. Kindly mark this date in your calendar. The details will follow, and the theme is newer diagnostics in pediatrics. Sir, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjay Swarup. I think now we will go for the second session. This is on pediatric dermatology. May I invite Dr. Vibhu Manjirata. She is currently working as a professor of dermatology at Lady Hardinge Medical College. She is a founder Society of Pediatric Dermatology. She is a Commonwealth Fellow and has done 6 months of training from Great Ormond Street Hospital, London. She was awarded Developing Countries Dermatologist Award. Pediatric dermatology is her chief interest. I happened to listen to her 2 of her talks, which were very enlightening. I am sure you are all going to enjoy this.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging words. And first of all, I would like to begin by complimenting the organizers for having selected such a relevant topic for this mixed session today, because I'm sure that pediatrics as a specialty is incomplete if you do not integrate all other specialties into it. And especially my area is pediatric dermatology, and let me start by saying that skin being the largest organ of the body, you cannot ignore the skin lesions that are there on the child's skin if you are treating whatsoever system that the child has come to you with. So my aim of the talk would be today to just brief you and familiarize you with common skin problems that you encounter in your office practice, and also to give you a brief idea as to how to diagnose them and how to manage them. So let us have an overview of which all problems do we see sitting in the clinic. First of all, we have infections, and all my learned friends here know that these are very, very common in our country. Being a tropical country, we see lots of boils, impetigos, which are the common bacterial infections, especially in the summer season, in the hot, humid weather. We get many children who come with this. We have lots of, a heavy load of fungal infections during the same time of the year in the form of ringworm or tinea. We have pityriasis versicolor, we have warts, molluscums, which are the common viral problems, and the candidal intertrigos. Then we have infestations. We often talk about scabies, and scabies, let me tell you that it's a great mimic. Many a times we get referrals from our pediatrician friends who are sitting above on the floor in Kalavati Saran Children's Hospital with a simple case of scabies which has generalized eczematization and which mimics an eczema, but the basic underlying problem is scabies, which has been completely ignored. We have pediculosis. Then we have the notorious maculopapular rashes, which really bother you as to what you are dealing with, whether it is a drug rash or it's a viral infection. We have the pediatric set of eczemas, and the topmost among these eczemas, we have the diaper dermatitis, atopic dermatitis, we have pityriasis alba, and we have always problem differentiating between P. alba and vitiligo. We have papular urticarias, miliarias, urticarias, ichthyosis, hemangiomas, and pityriasis rosea. So let us come to rashes first. And first of all, my advice to all my friends would be that you first make a note of the extent of the rash, whether it is symmetrical rash, which involves both the sides of the body and almost involving equally on both the sides, such as this, or it is an asymmetric rash which is just involving one side of the body. Now this gives us important information as to the etiology of the rash. If it's a symmetrically distributed rash, then there is a likelihood of an inside job, meaning that there is an underlying infection or a systemic reaction, whereas in an asymmetric rash, it can be caused by an external agent, and we have to look for the external offending agent in the history, which could be a contact to some plant product or any chemical or any clothing. It could be caused by sunburn. So this is common. Anybody can diagnose, and we diagnose it as diaper dermatitis. But let me tell you, it is not a diagnosis. It is just a category of skin diseases, because it can be caused by not plainly irritant contact dermatitis. It could also be caused by Candida albicans, allergic dermatitis, or seborrheic dermatitis. However, the commonest pattern of diaper dermatitis is caused by irritant contact dermatitis to the soiling caused by the fecal material. And as you can very easily appreciate here, that the convexities of the buttocks, they are the ones which are the most prominently involved regions. As you can see that the erythema here and in the second picture also is confined to the most prominent convex part of the buttocks. So this is the area which comes in contact with the feces and the urine, so results in this inflammation of the skin. And this is to differentiate from the previous picture, the candidiasis, which will prominently involve the folds rather than the convexities of the buttocks. And you would see erythematous papillar lesions, pustular lesions with a very distinct satellite lesions around in the periphery. So if you see, you will see the lesions in the periphery, and so the seborrheic dermatitis, you will see that in addition to the groin folds, there would be involvement of the other folds also with the form of greasy erythematous scales in the other folds of the body. Now coming to this quest, this is a very simple question to you all, that we had a 4-month-old baby who came to us with a very itchy red rash over both cheeks, and there was history of asthma in the mother. So what would you think of? Exactly. So with the history of asthma in the parents, I think the diagnosis becomes very clear, and this is what it looks like in the infantile phase, that the worst affected area in the infancy, that is the face and the cheeks, the chin and the forehead. They are the prominently involved areas. As you can see, there is erythema, there is oozing and crusting of the face. And this gets worse when the skin comes into contact with irritating substances such as harsh soaps, and the child becomes scratchy if the parents make the child wear tight fitting clothing. So this is atopic dermatitis, infantile atopic dermatitis. Now atopic dermatitis is a pleomorphic skin condition. It always does not remain on the face. The extensors are the areas which are involved in the infancy, but as the child grows and comes to the childhood phase, the eczema travels down from the extensors to the flexures, and it gradually settles down over the areas such as the antecubital foci, the popliteal foci, or the flexural dermatitis. So any boy, any child who comes to your clinic with flexural dermatitis in the form of itching, erythema or pigmentation or scaling, then you think of atopic dermatitis. It's your bounden duty to explain to the parents regarding the triggers of itch in atopic dermatitis, because counseling forms the cornerstone of management of atopic dermatitis, and the first and foremost precaution that you are going to educate the parents about is to take care of the xerosis of the skin. The skin should not be kept dry. There should be frequent emollient applications, and the soaps and detergents that are selected for washing the skin should be very carefully chosen. There are soap-free detergents these days which are commonly known as Sindex. They do not disturb the acid milieu of the skin. The acid pH is not disturbed. The contact with other household allergens in the form of house dust, mite, molds, pets, etc. should also be taken care of. Now, what is the checklist for a topic is that the nails should be kept short. The bathing time, the time when the child is given bath is very important. It should be limited to just about 5 minutes, and the child should not be allowed to remain in the tub for a very long time. It should be with a mild soap, and immediately within 3 to 5 minutes of giving bath to the baby, an emollient should be applied, because that will seal the moisture which is there on the skin, as well as it will keep the skin soft and supple. It will prevent the entry of allergens into the skin. Now, this is another dermatitis. This dermatitis can be, there in any child, more so in those who have an atopic background. This is seen in, cases when the child comes in contact with any allergen, a hypersensitivity reaction. It can be mild, where you just see, erythema and oozing, localized erythema and oozing. If it is severe, then can be widespread blistering, and there can be a lot of wet eczema, and you have to treat it with topical corticosteroids. Coming to urticaria, now I just wanted to highlight the fact that in pediatric age group, the urticarias by and large are acute urticarias. Chronic urticarias are less common, and these urticarias are most commonly caused by the viral infections, or they can be caused by worm infestations, drugs, and the food additives which are there. Now, if you see the first picture, I'm afraid if you are able to appreciate the blotchiness of the skin and the small papules, this is what we see in the exercise-induced urticaria. Urticaria lesions are very small. They do not look like classical urticaria lesions which are annular, as you see here. Now, this can be, an easy diagnosis for you all. But then urticaria can have different manifestations with just plain blotchiness of the skin, itchy lesions which are transient, temporary, and then they fade away within 24 hours. But if the lesions persist for longer than 24 hours, you have to think in terms of urticarial vasculitis, and that is the time when you refer the patient to a dermatologist for further investigations. Treatment is with the help of antihistamines. Chickenpox, I think everybody can diagnose, but sometimes when it is just beginning, the beauty of your clinical skill is if you diagnose it early. A full-blown case can be diagnosed, I think, I'm sure, even by an undergraduate student. But if it is just erupting, the lesions, they first start erupting over the covered areas. The child usually has a prodrome of cold, and there would be rhinorrhea, malaise, and what you see are the small tiny vesicles which sit on the erythematous area. So this description is known as dewdrops on rose petals. Coming to hand, foot and mouth disease, there has been a lot of talk about this viral condition, and we see lots of these cases in Kalavati Saran Children's Hospital. It is generally seen in children less than 5 years of age. They would come to you with a history of fever for about 5 to 7 days. Parents, they notice these vesicular eruptions which are there on the palms and soles in the oral mucosa. The child refuses to eat. There can be diarrhea. So this is a very mild illness, but the vesicular eruption, it makes it look very alarming. And you have to do nothing, just paracetamol, and you counsel the parents, reassure that it's a self-limiting condition. We have this roseola infanta, or the 3-day fever. Now, what is the peculiarity of this rash is that the child has fever for about 3 days, and the fever subsides. As soon as the fever subsides, it is followed by a rash which looks like an urticarial rash, but then the rash is also self-limiting. I'm just, focusing on these clinical scenarios is because these are common problems, and you should not get unnecessarily, unduly worried about these conditions. This is slap cheek appearance, and I'm sure you must have all seen these babies. This is again caused by a virus. You needn't do anything and this will fade off. We come to the herpes group of infections. Herpes labialis is very common and it is characterized by the presence of multiple group vesicles which become crusted and they are present around the angles of the mouth. Herpes zoster is a classical dermatomal distribution of these lesions, which as you see, herpes zoster, you will see a dermatomal distribution of the eruptions, and as you can see that this child had herpes zoster ophthalmicus. Now this is an emergency, and if the vesicles are around the eyes, then this should be immediately referred to the ophthalmologist because there can be involvement of the conjunctiva or the cornea. Yeah, so this is erythema multiforme. I just want to focus the target lesions. As you can see that the lesions have got two borders along with an inner erythematous ring. This is a common eruption which is caused by herpes simplex, Mycoplasma pneumoniae, and many drugs can give rise to this patterned eruption. Malaria or the prickly heat, the common sites are the face, the forehead and the back where there are numerous wet glands, and you only need to counsel that protection from the heat and cold compresses calamine lotion. This is bullous impetigo. As you can see that there are multiple pustular lesions which are very flaccid, they contain pus, and they can be treated with the help of local antibiotic creams if they are localized. In case there are generalized eruptions, then you need to give systemic antibiotics. So what is this? Just a quiz for all of you. There is seborrheic dermatitis. This is Seborrhea capitis if it is only in the scalp, and if it involves the other areas such as the retroauricular areas, it is seborrheic dermatitis. You need to just give topical steroid solutions and antifungal hair washes. Now these are pearly papules which are there, very commonly seen in children. What are these? Asymptomatic lesions, molluscum contagiosum, and you can treat them by just putting 20% potassium hydroxide solution. This will lead to inflammation and the lesions would subside on their own. So this is our common ringworm infection which is very common in adolescents due to hot weather. There is maceration of skin. You see this classical ring studded with papules in the periphery. You give topical antifungals. We have tinea capitis which looks like alopecia areata. These are patchy, hair loss which you see, but along with this you will see scaling in the scalp and loss of hair. So you have to treat it with oral antifungals. Pityriasis versicolor you will see in the form of multiple hyperpigmented scaly plaques on the trunk and on the back. You need to use topical antifungal solution for this. This is pityriasis alba. Now pityriasis alba is a condition which mimics vitiligo, but P. alba has got very ill-defined margins. Vitiligo will have very well-defined margins. It will stand out. The color would be depigmented ivory white, whereas in P. alba it will be a mild discoloration and you just need to use emollients and topical steroids. This is an infant who's just a month old presents with these erythematous papular pustular lesions. What is this? This is acne, infantile acne, and you needn't do anything about it. It will just fade out within 6 months. You can just prescribe calamine lotion. You have another physiological eruption which is erythema toxicum neonatorum, and you should be confident to diagnose it. We come to some vascular lesions which can come to you in your office practice. This is vascular malformation. You should refer to the dermatologist because if they are treated with the help of lasers, less than 1 year of age, results are very good. This is common hemangioma of infancy. It is strawberry hemangioma, and if it is uncomplicated, meaning that there is no ulceration, it is not obstructing the eye, it is not causing any feeding difficulties, or if it is not growing very rapidly, you just need to sit silently and observe for the natural resolution. Otherwise, you can use topical steroids, topical non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, and you can also use oral steroids or propranolol. So these are very common lesions, warty growths which are known as the verrucae, They can be of various kinds. They can be common warts on hands and feet. They can be plain warts on the face. And for these lesions, we use various things. For the common hypertrophic warts, we use wart paints. Selectin paint is there. You can give it to the patient and it is very easily treatable. Scabies, we all know in infants, it can involve palms, soles and the whole of the body, and it can look like exfoliative dermatitis. So you can give permethrin cream to the family and to the baby. Now this is papillary urticaria. It is a hypersensitivity reaction to the insect bites commonly seen in atopic children. So you have to protect from mosquito bites and use topical steroids. This is a scaly condition. I'm sure all of you recognize ichthyosis. There can be syndromic ichthyosis for which you need to refer to the dermatologist because there are various types. Mild ichthyosis vulgaris you can manage with the help of emollients. Adolescent acne you can treat with anti-acne face wash, and you can control the seborrhea. You can use topical antibiotic creams and topical retinoids. Now this eruption which looks like along the lines of parallelly running along the ribs. What is this? P. rosea. Yes, this is very important. So again, a condition which is self-limiting. You just need to give symptomatic treatment with the help of antihistamines and it subsides beautifully well. So this is P. rosea. Coming to the last slide, I would just give you some messages that always make the correct diagnosis before you give the treatment. Do a complete examination of the oral mucosa, the nails and the hair, and all scaly patches are not tinea. They could be dermatitis or it could be pityriasis rosea also. Avoid using steroid in a rash which is unclear. Use calamine lotion or an emollient instead and wait and watch for the response. There are many lesions such as warts, mollusks, atopic dermatitis, P. alba, papillary urticaria, scabies, mild acne, impetigo, which you can very efficiently treat by yourself in your office practice. Thank you for all your patient listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Sir, we'll take the questions in the end because we are running out of time. There's one small announcement. The prize distribution for the poster sessions for postgraduates is going to take place in another 10 minutes in Hall A. If anybody who is expecting a prize should head to Hall A. And so, we would like to invite Dr. Harsh Mahajan for the last talk. Sir, please.
Dr. Harsh Mahajan is a graduate from Maulana Azad Medical College. He did his MD from PGI Chandigarh. He is done fellowship in MRI in 1987. He is a pioneer in the field of MRI in India for the last 25 years. He has got multiple original papers and book chapters. He is honorary radiologist to the President of India and he was awarded Padma Shri by the Government of India. He is the current National President of Indian Radiology and Imaging Society. He is founder and chief radiologist at Mahajan Imaging Center and 8 radiology and nuclear medicine centers in North India. Dr. Harsh Mahajan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And good evening. It's sometimes nice to be the last batsman because you are supposed to get out very quickly. And also when the prize distribution is already on and has been announced, I expect very few to be sitting here. But we'll talk about pediatric imaging, which is something which on a daily basis, I think all of you have to refer patients for imaging. And at the outset, I would say that in every age group, but more so in the pediatric age group, we have to resort to those imaging modalities which do not give radiation. That is a maxim which should be followed. And so use of CT scan in the pediatric age group should be as less as possible. X-rays, of course, still play a very major role when necessary. And it is really ultrasound and in the brain, MRI, which is the way to go forward. Now, MR imaging in the pediatric population is fundamental, its principal role being structural evaluation and providing anatomical and pathological information. Functional imaging also comes into play in certain group of patients consisting of functional MRI as well as radionuclide imaging, PET and SPECT. And SPECT especially has replaced many other radiographic techniques because it gives much lesser radiation dose. Like you will not follow up a patient with MCU, but would rather do a radionuclide scan because that gives much lesser radiation. Now, when we talk of the brain, it is MRI and MRI alone. There is already increasing evidence that has got available that in the past, when CT used to be the only modality and when sequential CTs